Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Unlocking Nature. My name is Aisha, and my co-host is Dr. Kirsten Neke, and we are so happy to be hosting you this evening. Before we start, as this is our first Unlocking Nature event of the year, I would like to wish our audience a very happy 2026. I hope the year is already off to a great start. And now, let's dive into tonight's adventure because we are incredibly excited to be hosting this conversation. I want you to think back to the last time you were at the coast. Maybe it was over the holidays. Maybe you're fortunate enough to live there. You walked on the beach. You felt the water on your feet. You watched the waves roll in and out. But just beneath those familiar shores is a hidden world. Every ecosystem reveals a marine safari, packed with strange, beautiful creatures and remarkable behaviors if you know how to look. And so tonight we are thrilled to welcome Professor Charles Griffiths and his son Matt, the duo behind the YouTube series and recently launched book, Explore the Shore. Prof. Charles brings over 50 years experience in South African coastal marine biology and has discovered over 100 species new to science. He has authored around 250 scientific papers. I want the audience to just pause and think what this means. If you read one of his papers per week, it would take you over 5 years to read them all. His career is dedicated to making marine science clear, entertaining, and accessible. Both myself and my co-hosts are fortunate enough to both have been formative students of his. Matt Griffiths is a filmmaker and multidisciplinary artist who brings these stories to life. He blends science and storytelling through visuals, film, and powerful illustrations. In addition to creating all the Explore the Shore videos, he has also written children's books. We couldn't be more excited to have them with us this evening. So please welcome Explore the Shore. Prof. Charles and Matt, the floor is now yours.
So firstly, thank you so much for having us, share screen, and yeah, let's dive right in. So there's this hidden world that's along our coastlines, and even though I grew up with a father who's a marine biologist, I didn't really fully comprehend the bizarre and amazing world that I lived right next to. It was only as an adult and through Explore the Shore that I began to engage more deeply and to really understand how exciting every shore visit could be. There's always something new and interesting to see if you just know what you're looking at. And as I started to learn about the hydraulic starfish legs and solar-powered sea slugs, my eyes were opened up to this world of wonder. Suddenly, I was heading down to the shore on my own to hunt in the rock pools for a few hours at low tide. And that's the reason for Explore the Shore. There's this hidden world right there if you're just aware of it and if you understand it. And once I realized this, I wanted to share it. So here was this professor with bucket loads of knowledge, and well, he just happens to be my dad. And wait, I'm a content creator. So together, we're perfectly positioned to capture this amazing world and to share it with others. It might have taken me until about 30 to realize what was right in front of me, but once I did, I dove right in. So it's this world of curiosity and awe for me that's really what Explore the Shore is about. So a big thank you to Share Screen Africa for having us, and thank you all for joining us. And let's dive into the journey of Explore the Shore.
So I'll start by saying a little bit about my journey. So I started up growing in a rural environment in Kenya. So I was surrounded by wildlife, and every holidays we used to go down to the coast and snorkel on the coral reef. So it was fairly inevitable that I would become involved in a career that was biological. And I ended up going to the UK, to Southampton University, and doing my first degree in zoology. And then after I finished that degree, I lined up a PhD thesis that I was going to do on bats in the University of Canberra. But at that time, my parents were living in Durban. So on my way from the UK to Australia, I spent a few weeks with my parents in Kenya. in Durban.
I have a picture of you with your dad there.
Yeah, there's me with my dad on the Rift Valley in Kenya. So while I was staying with my parents in Durban, I went to the beach one day and bought a Natal Mercury and a drink. And then in the evening, when I was looking at the Natal Mercury, there was an advertisement there from the University of Cape Town for a PhD opportunity, but it was also a salaried job. And I had actually volunteered at the university before during my university holidays, so the professor didn't know who I was. Right, so I phoned up the professor, Professor Day, who the entire building is named after now, and inquired about this job. And he actually offered it to me over the phone. So my Australia plans got ditched, and instead I moved down to Cape Town and did my PhD there in marine biology. And as they say, the rest is history. I ended up moving from being the professor's research assistant to being the professor. And I've ended up being there for 55 years now. I've only ever held that one job. And for the last 55 years, I don't think I've ever had a month without a salary. I've just moved from the bottom of the pile through all the levels, lecturer, senior lecturer, associate professor, professor, and then finally head of department. So it's been a fantastic journey. And over that period of time, I've studied all sorts of different aspects of marine biology and supervised nearly 100 postgraduate students doing different projects. But the one theme that's kind of stuck through my entire career is the idea of biodiversity, and particularly of finding and describing new species. And as was mentioned in the introduction, that I've actually now described more than 100 species new to science, plus added over 200 others to the South African fauna. So those are species that were known from somewhere else in the world, but I found them for the first time in South Africa. So I'm just going to start by telling you a little story about one of those species, and that is the species that's shown on the screen now. It's named after Matthew. And the way that this turned out is that we were on holiday in the Knysna area when Matthew was 3 or 4 years old. We were, as usual, taking some photographs in the marine environment. But this species was actually found on one of the mountain passes. And we were going up the mountain pass. And at the time I was working on freshwater shrimps with a PhD student. And then Matthew suddenly asked to go to the toilet. He wanted to have a pee. So I found a little pull-in on the mountain pass. And then he hopped out, went behind a bush to do his business. And there was a nice little stream running down a culvert there. And like any good biologist, I had my little hand net behind the seat of the car. So while Matthew was busy having his pee, I hopped out and had a little netting session in the stream. And lo and behold, there were amphipods there, these little shrimps. And they were way out of the known distribution range for this group of animals, which only occurred in the Western Cape up to about Swellendam. And so here we were in Knysna, another 200 or 300 kilometers out of the range. So I brought them home, took a good look at them, and they turned out not only to be a new species, but also a new genus. And so the genus is named Mathamelita. The family is Melitidae, so it's Matthew's melitid. And we've never actually found the species again. Not that I've really searched for it, but this is the only sample dating from whatever it was, 35 years ago now. The species has never been found again, but it's named after Matt. So that's my first little little story about new species. We'll have a couple more little stories later on in the talk. But the real point I want to make now is that through this long career and all these graduate students that I've supervised and other professors that I've talked to and conferences that I've been to, I've picked up all sorts of interesting anecdotes about marine life, all sorts of little stories which are not really suitable to go into a textbook or to publish in my own publications. But they're fascinating stories, and I haven't really had an avenue to tell them. So the aim of the Explore the Shore book is largely now to bring out some of these interesting and fascinating anecdotes about the biology and behavior of marine animals, and to put them out there for people to understand in an easy to follow way. So we don't use technical language, we don't use Latin names. We try and keep the whole thing fairly light and entertaining. And I mean, even the Labradoodle, the dog, Ben, has little speech bubbles, and he comes in from time to time and makes little comments about our findings.
So you might have gathered from my little introduction that I'm not a marine biologist. I'm not even a scientist. I'm the black sheep in the family of PhDs. Everybody else in my immediate family has a PhD. So I went into the arts. I was interested in music and film and drawing and anything artistic. So how did we reunite and get to explore the shore? So it was like 2019, 2018, 2019. Charles had been working with Craig Foster, who is the director and star of My Octopus Teacher, the Netflix and Oscar-winning film. And they'd been hanging out on the shore, and Charles had been, I guess, consulting with and helping Craig learn about different things. And they'd been talking about new species and what Craig had been discovering. And he thought, well, Matthew should really meet this amazing filmmaker. So he took me along to the shore with Craig. And we ended up having a whole discussion. Craig and I ended up having a whole discussion about Charles and all this knowledge that he has and how it might be possible to capture and to share that knowledge. And to share it with others, I think, because there's this whole world that we were getting to see through Charles's eyes. The rock pools were suddenly coming alive, and it was this exciting place to be explored, but only if you had the understanding which Charles had. So that was kind of the genesis of Explore the Shore. After that conversation, Charles and I had a bunch of conversations ourselves, and we realized, okay, we could probably actually do this. I have the camera, the skills to put something together. Charles has been doing lectures on all of these topics for years and years and has this very easy way of speaking about anything from an anemone to an amphipod to biodiversity or alien species on our shores. And that's how Explore the Shore initially got started. Also like to mention that this new venture which we embarked upon was very strongly supported by Roberta, who was Charles's wife and my mother. She was really happy to see her son and her partner getting together, and especially seeing, I think, me getting involved in anything environmental. She was in environmental education and conservation, and it's a topic she had a lifelong passion for. So she was very happy to see us working together. And by around mid-2022, we had released over 20 episodes of Explore the Shore. So each episode of Explore the Shore ranges from 5 minutes. I think the longest one is actually about 30, but they're usually 5 to 12, 15 minutes. And we cover either a creature or a feature of the shore. So a feature could be tides or biodiversity or beachcombing. And the creatures are obviously anemones or clipfish or octopus. So we had created around 20 of those. And that's when Roberta became terminally ill. So we paused the project at that point to be with her and make sure that we had some quality time. I think she was very happy with what we had done up to that point, and knowing that we would continue after she had passed away. And then in 2023, after she had passed, we were contacted by the People's Weather Channel, and they asked us to turn what we had already filmed into 5 25-minute episodes. So with a little bit of smart editing, we turned our little tiny portion episodes into bigger episodes, which could be put onto TV. And that allowed us to reach now tens of thousands of more people. I think our viewership was something like 200,000 or 300,000 individual views. So yeah, we reached a whole new audience through going on to public television.
So then in 2023 or so, we picked up again, and we actually started with a special issue about naming species, and which we named a species after Roberta, in fact. And at this point now, we've actually done more than 50 episodes, and we've covered quite a bit of the ground. And then Jonathan Bull Publishers actually started looking at some of these episodes and decided that this might make a very interesting book. So it wasn't our idea. They actually approached us to commission us to do a book that would complement the video series. And that's what's happened now. We brought out in November this book with the creatures, the features, and the issues of the coastline. And about 50 of those spreads in the books of the topics that are covered in the book do have corresponding YouTube episodes, but there's still about 10 topics in the book which we haven't filmed an episode for, and that's our immediate project for the next few months, is to try and film those extra episodes. So if you buy a book, you'll see that it has QR codes in the corner of most of the pages that you can click on and watch the corresponding video. And if there isn't a QR code, you still should go online and look for one, because we keep adding videos all the time.
Hopefully we'll get to a second edition at some point, and then we'll have filled
We'll
up.
have all the QR codes in
Yeah.
there.
So speaking a little bit about the filming, Charles, I thought we could talk a bit about some of your top moments from filming. I feel like every time we go down to the shore, we might be looking for something, but we'll discover something else, or something bizarre will happen. So let's have a look at your top 5 moments, I think, from filming Explore the Shore.
Right, yeah.
Give me your top
I think it's quite easy to pick out the top one. And the amazing thing about it is that it happened right here in the middle of Cape Town City, in the Sea Point Prom, just opposite Matthew's flat here. And we'd gone down onto the seashore to film something fairly mundane. I think it was maybe Briar's Owens or something. But anyway, I was sitting in a rock pool there, and then I turned over a rock, and there was an enormous abalone underneath the rock. So we immediately stopped filming the topic that we'd gone down to work on. I ad-libbed an episode about the abalone, because it's not
Super
often
rare, yeah, to see
it's
a
not
giant
often you find a giant abalone right in the middle of the city in the intertidal. And just as we'd finished filming the abalone episode, then I felt something pushing against the back of my leg. And then Matthew said to me, "There's an enormous lobster there." So I turned around and reached down and picked up the lobster. There was a beautiful rock lobster. Again, you very seldom, in fact, I've never seen as large a rock lobster as that, actually in an intertidal rock pool. So I picked it out, and then I quickly had to compose another episode about rock lobsters. So we filmed 2 whole episodes, sort of ad-libbed over an hour or so on that morning. And then finally, I was just about to put the lobster back in the water and let it go. And then I noticed that it had some strange creatures living on its limbs. And those creatures are a very strange type of worm called goblet worms. And the technical name for them is endoprocs. They belong to the phylum Endoprocta. And in my whole 50-year career of teaching marine biology, I never ever come across an endoproct before. So this actually has turned out, I was pretty sure at the time that it was going to be a new species, but it actually has turned out that more than 50 years ago, somebody did find this exact same creature living on a rock lobster and on a rock crab on the Cape Peninsula, and did actually name it. So it hasn't been seen again since the 1940s till now, but it is actually a described species. So that was I think our most incredible day. We had the endoproct, the worm, and we had the rock lobster, and we had the giant abalone all in one morning.
If you go to our YouTube, you can obviously see all of this unfold. You can watch the abalone episode and then move to the rock lobster episode, and you'll see just.
So the action is actually right there in the film, where we're filming live, and I say, "Oh no, something just touched my leg." So that was I think our most amazing day. But we quite often do discover really amazing species. So another one, which is also right here on the prom in Sea Point, is this amazing worm, which is called the hair curler worm. And again, it is actually a described species, although almost nothing is known about it. But it walks along and it has these long tentacles off each segment. And as it walks along, it just uncurls those long tentacles and then curls them up again. Nobody really knows why it does that. Maybe it's a defense mechanism, or maybe it's feeling what's around it in the environment. But that's the hair curler worm. So that's just a beautiful photographic species. And then the next thing that I would identify as being special is when we absolutely, definitely find a new species. So this was a day in Komiki, and in fact, at Komiki, we've found at least 2 new species in the course of filming episodes. We have found an amphipod shrimp there that makes nests under rocks out of little pieces of seaweed, and that's a completely new species, which is being described with the aid of a colleague of mine from New Zealand. And then we found this amazing thing. This is an isopod, which sort of looks a bit like a praying mantis. It holds onto the rocks with its back 3 pairs of legs, and then raises the front end of the body and reaches out into the water and presumably grabs things that are floating past with its front legs. And I've never seen anything that looks remotely like this. I collected this species. I do have a permit to collect specimens for taxonomic work. And the specimen has been sent to a researcher in Germany who is busy describing it as a new species quite a number of times now. It's always a major thrill to me.
My question is, who is this going to get named after?
No, that won't be.
It's always the question.
I don't think we can really use a family name.
Can we name it after Ben? So we haven't really mentioned Ben, but Ben's the Labradoodle who lives with Charles, and he often makes an appearance in our episodes. So if you watch our YouTube, you'll see him pop up now and then. He's the only member of the family who doesn't have something named after him.
And then another really great thing is watching the behavior patterns of species. So this was a classic day when we went up to Longabon to film an episode about hermit crabs. And in Longabon Lagoon, there's an enormous density of hermit crabs, and that means there's a big housing shortage. So the hermit crabs really struggle to find enough and nice enough shells to live in. So what we did is we collected a packet of nice shiny shells from the beach in Cape Town, and we took them up to Longabon, and then we put them down in front of the hermit crabs. And then the hermit crabs rush over and then inspect the shell. This one's just in the process of inspecting the shell to check that it's nice and empty and that it's clean, doesn't have holes in it. And then it whips its abdomen out of its own shell and then quickly turns around and moves into the new shell. And in fact, then its previous shell becomes a vacant home, and then often another smaller hermit finds that shell and then moves into that as well. So often you start a whole little chain reaction there of hermits moving from one shell to another, everybody upgrading. So that was a really great behavior day. And then the last one that I've chosen is the tuberculate cuttlefish. This looks nothing like the tuberculate cuttlefish, but it is the tuberculate cuttlefish. So its head is at the left-hand end, his head is at the right-hand end there, with his little legs hanging down. And then we turned over a rock and then suddenly exposed him, and he's got these giant creatures looking at him, and he decides to disguise himself as another animal. So this one has disguised himself as a hermit crab living in a whelk. So the back end of his body becomes elongate and smooth and kind of purple with little white areas on it, which look like lichens or seaweeds growing on the shell. And then his front, his tentacles, he makes look like the little legs of a hermit crab. And then he very quietly, surreptitiously walks slowly away, pretending, no, I'm just a hermit crab in the shell, and you don't need to worry about me. And then when he gets a little way away, he suddenly turns back into a cuttlefish and swims away. So this is an amazing thing to watch. And sometimes they pretend that they're just whelks. Sometimes they pretend that they're hermit crabs inside whelks, but they're the masters of disguise. So those are my 5 top
Okay.
things.
Thanks.
And what about your top things?
Okay. So for me, I'm always going for the most bizarre, like the weird behaviors. I mean, we've covered a couple of them already, but I have a few which I think are pretty strange. So one of the very first episodes that we did was on starfish, and I never knew that starfish legs were hydraulically operated. So they're powered by seawater. And I'm not this you can verify, you can fact check me whether I actually learned. So they suck in water through their skin, right?
Through
Their valve,
a special little
a
filter.
valve in their skin. Yeah.
On the dorsal side of the animal, there's a special little stone-like filter with tiny holes in it, and they filter the water through that so that it doesn't have any sand particles.
And then they use that to pump and extend these little fish, sorry, feet, which you can see at the bottom here. And they extend their feet, and then the suckers attach on to the rock, and then they pull back.
The little muscles on each tube foot.
To think that they actually are pumping water around their body in order to move around. Never mind the fact that they don't have a brain and they have thousands of feet, but the fact that they were hydraulically operated, I thought was the strangest thing about them. I chose this solar-powered sea slug. So these sea slugs eat the what's the name?
Chloroplast.
Chloroplast, thank you. Eat the chloroplast and then put them into their skin and actually do the photosynthesis in their skin and get sugars and energy from the sun using the cells from the food that they've eaten.
They kidnap the photosynthetic mechanism from the seaweed, so they can actually go for months without feeding there. They just bask in the sun and then turn carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates.
That's completely bonkers to me. I mean, imagine if we could do that. We could just go lie in the sun for a little bit instead of having to cook and eat meals all the time.
Be a bit boring.
The hydroids, there are so many things which we've come across, which we've covered in our different episodes, where I've initially gone, surely that's a plant. That's not an animal, that's a plant. And it turns out that actually it's a very complex organism and it's an animal. So these hydroids, which are related to jellyfish, and they grow these stalks with a little, kind of like a little jellyfish tentacle catching and filtering the water, and then they even release little jellyfish like
which swim off and then set up another little colony.
Reproduce and set up another colony. So that was for me quite strange. But also
it's not a plant.
Yeah, it's not a plant. It's a whole animal.
We've had that quite a few times with these episodes. You mean that's not a plant?
The suckerfish, we saw this amazing suckerfish which was out on the rock hunting for these limpets. So apparently they wait for the limpets to lift up, and then they jump up when the wave goes over, grab the limpet with their very sharp teeth, pull it off, and then swallow it whole. So then the question is, what do you do with a limpet shell once you've swallowed it? And Charles tells me that actually they stack them up inside them like dinner plates until they've got a big pile of them, and then they regurgitate the whole pile up
and
like
a
bunch of dinner plates. Completely bizarre. And then one which thought was both bizarre but also incredibly clever were these spiders, which live down in the intertidal zone. So firstly, an insect in the intertidal is bizarre in itself. But these spiders create little submersibles. So this is actually the underneath of a limpet shell. And then the spider knits itself around the edge of the limpet shell with its silk and attaches it onto a rock so that when the tide comes in, it has a little air pocket and it can survive underwater inside this limpet shell, which it's glued onto the rock.
The diving bell.
Little submersible spiders. Yeah, that to me was just...
And that's the only place that they live. They only live in the intertidal. It's a specifically marine species of spider.
So that's, those for me were my top 5, which I chose for today, but there's always more. Every time we go down to the shore, there's something else which is completely crazy. And I'm like, are you for real? This is actually what's happening down here. And that's kind of the whole journey for me has been this awe of discovery.
This isn't in our script, but I just add a little thing in here. So this spider, which is not an insect, it's fine.
Arachnid.
Actually has a little wingless wasp, which only lives by laying its eggs in the eggs of the spider. So the spider lays its eggs in this nest, and the little wingless wasp goes in there and lays its eggs on the spider's egg, and then its larvae develop inside the spider egg. and that's the only place it lives. It's like it's only known from Komiki. It's never been found anywhere else, and it lives only in the eggs of this particular species of intertidal spider. So crazy, eh?
It's like a bit of a
It's like
evolutionary
evolution is
niche. Yeah.
completely dead end.
So, I mean, we found quite a few things while we've been filming, and we have our special episode, which we mentioned earlier, which we've devoted to discovering and naming species. And I recommend that everyone go and watch that. If you've enjoyed this talk, it has a little bit more about Charles's story, a little bit more about my story, but also a big bit of the story is about discovering new species, what goes into that, how they're named. Yeah, it's quite an interesting episode and quite different from our usual fare. But in that episode, we cover the fact that our nuclear family, and I mentioned it a bit earlier, has a very unique achievement in that we all have animals named after us. So we spoke about Mathamelita, which was named after me when I was a wee lad, which is cool. Actually, it is literally on my CV. I have all my normal CV stuff, and then, you often add that fun line at the end that I have a amphipod species named after me by my dad. So tell us a little bit about the other animals. So the nuclear family is the two of us, and I have a sister, Melinda, and my mother, Roberta. So we all have species named after us.
So I have a few species named after me, but it's not ethical to name a species after yourself. So I can't use my own name if I describe a species. So I can describe species and name them after friends and colleagues and so on.
Or your children.
Or your children. But the species that are named with my name are ones which I've found, but I didn't describe myself. I sent them to other colleagues, maybe because they were experts in that particular group, and then they named species after me. So I think I have 5 species named after me. And the one which Matt often brings up is the very first one that I had described after me with my name. There's a parasitic flatworm from inside the stomach of suckerfish that we just showed you. So that's not one that I actually kind of put up on the wall and boast about, but that was the first thing that was named after me. And then most of the others are shrimps, which is the group that I mostly work on. So this shrimp is called Griffiths. That's the genus name, and obviously named after me, but not by me. And then my daughter Melinda has lovely species named after her. So, and I didn't do the naming. Roberta did the naming, my wife. So there's Melinda at the age of about 6, which is at the time when the species was named after. And that's Roberta. And she's also was a marine biologist. And the species is actually the most beautiful of all of us. So it's a beautiful blue sea slug or nudibranch. And so Roberta named this after Melinda, but the name Melinda is what taxonomists call preoccupied. That is, there's already another genus called Melinda. And actually most people's names do already have a genus named after them. So we had to change the letters around. So it's called Leminda instead of Melinda, but it is still named after Melinda. And it's actually not only the only species in its genus, but it's the only genus in the family. So it's a very unique species. And what's even more striking about the species is that recent research by the chemistry department at Rhodes University has actually shown that it has chemicals in its body that react against esophageal cancer. So those chemicals are being now developed as a drug to treat esophageal cancer. So it could turn out to be a very significant species.
And then for the longest time, you had not named a species after Roberta.
That's right. So, Roberta for years sort of said to me, like, well, when's my turn? You've named something after both the children. And what about me? And it got to a point where I kind of had to find something fairly special to actually
Can't be the parasitic worm from the stomach of a suckerfish.
Parasitic worm from the stomach of a suckerfish. So eventually, actually, just when she started to get ill in a terminal illness, then I found the perfect thing, and it was amphipod, which is the group that I spent most of my life working on, but it burrowed into the stems of kelp plants. And Roberta and I spent the early part of our marriage working together on a project called the Kelp Bed Project. So we've been working on kelp beds. So kelp beds and amphipods were very meaningful to the family. And so I named this species after Roberta. And then I made a much nicer photograph than this one and printed a very nice photograph of it and then framed it and put a little vial in the corner of the frame with an actual specimen of the amphipod, and I presented it to her as a birthday present during her terminal illness, which actually went down extremely well. So, and we've filmed a special episode about this whole story, which is on our YouTube channel.
So I think that covers a lot of our YouTube journey. And then let's speak a little bit about the book. So we mentioned the book, we were approached by Jonathan Ball to bring out the Explore the Shore book. So I would say it serves as a companion guide to the YouTube series, but it also stands alone. It's got a whole lot of extra information in it that is not in the series, and bits and pieces that we are still adding to the series. And then, yeah, to be able to take something down to the shore and know what you're looking at and dive into this world while you're sitting on the shore, I think is quite a handy thing.
And then you can come home, click on QR code, and watch the corresponding video. So it's a very, the two things really mesh really well together. And there's Ben on the cover. He also features.
There's a couple of the spreads from the book, so it can give you an idea what it looks like. We tried to keep the same sort of entertaining. The stories which we've been telling, many of them are in there. Try and keep the colorfulness, and yeah, we really want to just help guide people on this journey, which I'm basically going on with Charles, of discovering the ocean, discovering the shore, discovering what's there, and the awe and the amazing world that is happening down there with these bizarre creatures, and all.
We also have a section on the issues which we haven't really kind of covered in this talk. So we talk about the issues like overexploitation, climate change, invasive species, fishing, and so on.
If anybody is, obviously there's the YouTube link which you can go to, and if anybody is interested in the book, it is selling in most major bookstores, and we are also selling copies through our Instagram. So you're welcome to go and have a look there. And I think the last thing before we get into Q&A and a bit of a chat, I think I wanted to bring this back to conservation, because that's the main theme. I think all of this links back to conservation, having these stories and knowing what's actually happening down on the shore. I think about how few people I've met who know about this world, and we want to help them discover that in ways which are both meaningful and respectful to the environment. And I think when you understand the beauty in a space, then you want to conserve it. You want to look after it. And I mean, I certainly care a lot more about the coast now than I did a few years ago. I had no idea how complex and bizarre and just downright crazy our coastline is.
And how little known as well. I think another thing which always surprises people is how easy it is to go down to the seashore and actually find things that nobody has found before. And then, I mean, most of these species, in fact, all we have for the animal is the name. We don't really know too much about how it lives, its biology, how it reproduces, and so on.
And I think once you start exploring the shore and start understanding it, then there's no going back.
It's a world of adventure.
And these are just a few of the things that we've captured while we've been down there. Cool.
Okay, I think that's about all we want to say, but we welcome any questions, and we'd be happy to try and answer any questions that you have. Look at that beautiful worm, beautiful spinal worm.
Prof. Charles and Matt, I want to say thank you for a very informative and such a visually captivating and at the same time heartwarming session. That was amazing, and thank you so much for that. I'm going to be a bit selfish now, before I open the floor to any questions. I have just two questions of my own. So the first one is, Charles, you have a very long and extensive career So how have you seen the ocean seashore change over time?
Okay, yeah. Now that's a really interesting question because the seashore's changed in quite a number of interesting ways. So one way in which it's changed is due to climate change. So and climate change has affected the local ocean in slightly unexpected ways. As you might expect, then more tropical species have moved further down the east coast. So we're now getting tropical Indo-Pacific species occurring right down in the Eastern Cape and on the Southern Cape coast. But what is more surprising is that actually in the Western Cape here, then the sea is actually getting cooler, not warmer. And the reason
Oh,
for that is because as the land gets warmer, then we get more intense onshore winds and offshore, well, we get more intense winds. And when those winds blow offshore, it causes more upwelling, and that causes the sea temperature to drop. So the temperature in Cape Town has actually been dropping. The sea temperature has been dropping by about 0.5 degrees per decade, which is like 2.5 degrees over the time that I've been around. And you can see that in some quite dramatic ways. So, for example, the most visually dramatic way that it's visible is in the distribution of kelps. So when I first came to Cape Town, the kelps stopped just north of Simonstown. So there were no kelps in areas like St. James or Fishhook. And now the kelps have extended right into the warmer areas of False Bay, right to Muizenberg Corner. So kelps have become far more abundant and are in fact spreading further east. So kelps are now extend as far as De Hoop, whereas before they stopped before Cape Agulhas. So that's
yes.
one change, climate change. Another really important change that's taken place has been the arrival of invasive species. So a number of important space occupying species have been introduced to South Africa over the last 50 years. The most obvious of those is the Mediterranean mussel, which is the main black mussel that you see on the seashore in the Western Cape, and in fact along areas of the Southern Cape now. So if you look at the intertidal in particularly on the West Coast, the mid-intertidal is just black. The rocks are black, and those are all Mediterranean mussels, which were introduced accidentally by shipping in about 1980, and they're now the dominant species on the West Coast in the intertidal. And there are several other very important ones, including another species of bisexual mussel, which actually comes from South America. And the upper intertidal is colonized by a Pacific barnacle, which also comes from South America. So actually, a lot of what you see in the intertidal on the West Coast now, a lot of the more numerous animals are introduced species that really shouldn't be there. And
Yes.
so the West Coast doesn't look like the West Coast looked 50 years ago. And then the
I,
last thing that is mentioning is exploitation. So exploitation has had quite significant impacts, but those impacts are actually a lot less than they are in many other parts of the world. But they have had significant impacts on specific target species. And the most important of those target species are rock lobsters and abalone. So in the early days, you would snorkel off the reefs here and you would see beds of abalone. And those were exploited by legal commercial divers in the 1960s and 70s, and more recently, mostly by poachers, because the commercial fishery is actually now being closed, although it's been substituted by farming abalone. And then rock
mm,
lobsters is a great example. When I was a student, my fellow students used to collect rock lobsters to feed to their dog because it was cheaper than buying dog food. Uh, and
yeah.
only about 5% of the stock of rock lobsters that were present before exploitation are still there. So we've reduced the standing stock, the amount of animals in the water, to 5% of what it was pre-exploitation. So that's a massive difference. But
Yes.
the rest of the shore is actually in remarkably good condition. And other researchers who visit me from even Europe are often really surprised that you can go down to the shore in the city here and you can see all sorts of edible things that the people are not into really collecting them. So our coastline is still in pretty good shape.
Yeah, off the top of my head, Matt, you'll know better. From what I remember, there was an episode on invasive species, specifically the mussels, and there was an episode as well as the foraging. We interviewed someone. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
Yes.
On your
So
YouTube
foraging for seaweeds is a very benign activity because you cut off the leaves of the seaweeds, the fronds of the seaweeds, and eat them, and you leave the base of the seaweed and it just grows again. So it's just like mowing the grass. After a few weeks, those seaweeds have recovered. So, I'd say that's a very environmentally
Even
friendly
the
way.
mussels are also, they reproduce
Yeah,
so
yeah.
wildly that if you go and collect mussels for your meal, they just grow back.
Yeah,
very
I've been
quickly.
collecting mussels from basically the same rock in my secret spot for the last years, and there's still just as many there as there were 50 years ago. They only live for a few years and they have an enormous potential to reproduce. They produce millions of eggs every year.
Yeah. Prof, I want to ask you, so watching your videos, and no, let me start way back. Reading your books from a young age and connecting with you in that way without even meeting you. Later on, going through all your books, and as I showed you earlier, the way I think everybody that has a Two Oceans field guide, it's a used book. It's like a very well used book going to the shore, and it completely changes the way you start seeing the shore. Now, many people go on holiday to the shore every day. I want to know for you, who is supposed to be on retirement now. So, what is your day-to-day life now, and what is it like in the near future? What are your plans?
Okay, well, I'm not the sort of person that's going to sit on my rocking chair on the stoep. I like to keep, busy and involved with different projects. So obviously, this project, the Explore the Shore project, has been quite a major feature in my life for the last 3 or 4 years, and we still have some work to do, as we've already mentioned. We're still wanting to go out over the coming few months and take the last 5 or 10 episodes that will correspond to pages that we've already written in the book. Although, of course, we could still go on making other episodes. There's a limitless number of episodes that one could make. But the main project that I'm busy working on at the moment is a website that is called 1001 Species from the Great African Sea Forest. And it's actually been done with Craig Foster, the octopus teacher guy that we mentioned earlier, and his team. So the idea derived from the fable of the 1001 Nights. That's where, the Arabian fable, where the lady in the harem saved her life by telling the king stories every night, but not finishing the story. So he kept her alive to hear the end of the story. So Craig's idea was that by telling 1001 stories about the sea forest, we could help save the sea forest. So it's quite a great little marketing pitch. But it's involved sort of going much deeper than, deeper into the subject than Two Oceans. So in Two Oceans, we've got like 1,500 species from the whole of South Africa. And now we're doing 1001 species just from the kelp, and you can blow up those pictures full size on your screen. So I think it's going to be a fantastic thing for those of us that live in the Western Cape. No, useful for people who live across the whole country. So those are my main projects that I'm busy working with, although I still have a position at UCT and I still have students and I still give talks and so on.
No, we are looking forward to that book, Prof. And I just want to repeat again, you said earlier to get the book, we go onto your Instagram page and there's a form there.
There's a form on our Instagram in the links section, and we are selling slightly reduced price compared to the exclusive books and so on of the world. But more importantly, you get a signed copy. So get one of these, and it'll come signed by both of us.
To find stuff, or is it saturated? Do you think? I'm amazed that you've discovered so many and I mean, there's still more. So, like, how do you get to the bottom of it? Because you don't know what to look after if you don't even know it exists. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, it's quite difficult to quantify how many species there are that are unknown because that is unknown. But I have actually kind of tried to do it. And the way that I tried to do it was to look at groups of species that are very well known, like mammals and fish, for example, and look at how many species there are in South Africa and compare that with Europe, which is the best described fauna in the world. And so if they're the same number of fish in South Africa as there are in Europe, or the same number of mammals, then one might expect there would be the same number of worms, for example. And using that logic to say, well, if we look at well-known species, what is the ratio between South Africa and Europe? And if we look at poorly known species, what you find is for the well-known species, the ratio is fairly consistent. It's almost 1-to-1. In fact, although Europe has got many more scientists and a much larger area, much longer coastline. Even the coastline of the UK alone is like 5 times the length of the South African coastline. But if you look at poorly known groups of animals, then the ratio is highly skewed, and we have much too few species in South Africa. And that kind of tells you that we haven't done the work yet. And indeed, that is the case. And what I quite often do is set some students onto those groups of animals which appear to be very poorly known. And then if they go to the museum and actually look at the collections in the museum, they often find specimens of undescribed species that were collected decades ago and just put in a jar of alcohol and put on the shelf in the museum. And they've just sat there for many years and sometimes decades waiting for the right scientist to come along with the right skills to actually describe that. And so, a lot of my students have described numerous species without actually even going out to the seashore, just by going and opening bottles in the museum.
Oh, wow.
So there's well, just to give you the sort of result of the paper that I did about how many species need to be described, I estimated that about a third of the macroscopic species in South Africa are still unnamed. And
Wow.
certainly the sort of experiences that we have, I can tell you numerous little anecdotes about how we've, got into looking for a different group of animals. I mean, I'll tell you one. I just very quickly. So I put a student, Jonas Lanskopf, a German student who's now working for the Octopus Teacher Group. I suggested that he work on hermit crabs, and when he started his PhD, there were, I think, 37 hermit crab species known from South Africa. And when he finished his PhD 3 years later, there were 87. So, that's how easy it is to, and these are large,
and that's
relatively well-known
and that's
animals.
in current times. I mean, it's not like you had to be
Yeah.
in 1726 kind of thing. I mean, and if I just consider the Cape Floristic Kingdom and how many species there are, I mean, I think there's more than the whole of Europe, just within the Cape Floral Kingdom. So probably the same for in the sea. So yeah. I mean, it just also
another interesting aspect here, and that is that the Western Cape is like very similar to the Western Cape Ocean is very similar to the fynbos. So the fynbos is almost entirely made out of endemic species, and it's like an entire separate region that's isolated from other Mediterranean climate regions by thousands of kilometers. I mean, the nearest ones are in South America and Australia. And similarly, the south coast of South Africa is a temperate sea, but it's isolated from other temperate seas by thousands of kilometers. So we're in the area of maximum endemicity in the Western Cape here in the sea, just like we are in the Cape Floral Kingdom.
What is the biggest threat to the intertidal zone biodiversity, and what is something we, the everyday people, can do to help, from Tempe Adams?
That's an interesting question, and I don't know that there's a straightforward answer to it. I can kind of work around it a little bit. You know, an interesting thing about the marine environment is that the extinction rate is far, far lower than the extinction rate on land or in fresh water. And the reason for that is that, you know, land and fresh water is made up of a whole lot of little islands. So, you know, the best example would be like rivers and ponds. Each river and pond is isolated from other rivers and ponds by an ocean of land. And if species are endemic to a particular river, and then you make them go extinct there, you overexploit them, then they've got no way of spreading to another river. And it's the same to a certain extent on land. So you'll get animals that are living on a particular mountain, like Table Mountain. There's 27 species of animal that are endemic to Table Mountain, but they can't get across the Cape Flats. So if we extinguish them on Table Mountain, then they're extinct. The ocean's not like that. The ocean is one continuous system. And if you remove animals from a particular area, then the larvae from another area, hundreds or thousands of kilometers away, can float in on the current and recolonize that area. So it's far more unlikely for animals to become extinct in the ocean. And there are, in fact, no recorded instances of South African invertebrate animals going extinct, marine invertebrate animals. There was one paper that described the extinction of a estuarine pipefish, but the very next year we discovered it again in another estuary. So they had to write another paper, or the authors had to write another paper saying, no, sorry, it's not extinct after all. So extinction is less common, but the threats are the same ones that I mentioned when I mentioned the changes a little while ago. So the threats are overexploitation, which tends to be directed towards a specific group of species, fish and economically important invertebrates like abalone and rock lobster. So some fish, for example, the 74 used to be the dominant lionfish sold in KwaZulu-Natal. And now, in my entire life, I've never seen one in the wild. I've seen one or two in the Two Oceans Aquarium, but they're now commercially extinct, basically, because they were overfished. But in invertebrates, there are very few people exploiting them, so they're really not so threatened. There's habitat change as a threat, but then that's also confined to very specific areas. So some species that are in estuaries, like the Knysna seahorse, for example, are threatened by habitat change. But that's just like a very unusual example where that fish is only found in 3 estuaries: the Keerboons, the Knysna, what's the other one? I don't know, I forget, but one of the other garden route estuaries, Sedgefield, yeah. So it's in Knysna, Sedgefield, and Keerboons, but nowhere else in the world.
You're asking about what can be done. I think
Yes.
speaks that what Charles is talking about there speaks to, for example, the marine protected areas. So if you have they are sometimes contentious in how they are done, but when you do have a marine protected area, it allows the animals to go into that area to breed, to grow up, and then to spread back out into the rest of the areas. I think you have some.
Yeah, I mean that's
data on
that's the
it.
key thing, is that it doesn't have a fence around it, like terrestrial, protected
National
areas.
parks.
There's some very nice data, for example, about Galjoen, the South Africa's national fish, in the De Hoop Marine Reserve, which is in the kind of center of distribution. And some of the researchers at UCT looked at the Galjoen populations, and they not only recovered very quickly in the De Hoop marine protected area after it was declared, but also they've recovered in areas adjacent to the reserve, because they're breeding in the reserve and then they're spilling over. The excess animals are spilling over boundaries and restocking the areas where you can fish for them.
So I think if there are enough of they're done well, then they really have a significant impact.
It's a very effective mechanism. And of course, the short answer to your question really about what you can do is to not overexploit things, So if you want to eat a fish, then you just take what you need to eat, and you don't, catch a whole bucket load just because you can, and then, hand them out to all your friends, kind of thing. You just
Also, I guess eating variety as well, and not just eating the same ones also means that
and some species, like fish, have these red, yellow, and green labels to them in terms of what the impact is. Then the same applies to invertebrates. So some invertebrates, like rock lobster and abalone, have all the wrong characteristics. They slow growing, late maturing. They're not productive species. Whereas things like mussels, then you can exploit them quite hard, and then they just keep bouncing back because they have a very high reproductive rate. They grow very quickly, and they mature very early.
I appreciate, Prof, that you're sharing so many positive stories, because I think we so sometimes
it's not a negative thing. I think for the marine environment's a much happier place in kind of sense than people who work particularly in freshwater ecosystems, which I've had a fair amount to deal with, and I've supervised a fair amount of freshwater students. And I mean, they're really in South Africa in a shocking state of pollution and overexploitation. So much worse off. Things are much worse off in the freshwater environment.
Yes. I have one. I'm going to go back to the chat after this. I have a question, and this one's more directed at you, Matt. If I look and the story that you shared with us, and your life story, and all these points of how everything came together, your journey and your studying and everything worked out. And now your son is a content producer, like you said, and then it gave rise to this. But Matt, I want to ask you, was there any difficulty in translating heavy science into storytelling? Or was challenges?
Look, I mean, Charles, like I mentioned, Charles has a lot of experience of presenting this information to classes. He's done a lot of lecturing, so he's quite able to package it into, a short and more or less entertaining format. We have had to work on the entertaining a little bit, just in terms of presentation. One can read something and make it sound very boring, or can read it and make it sound really interesting. So that's kind of been the thing that we've been working on, and not being
filmed, but be more lively.
Yeah. So there's been a bunch of second takes, but overall it's actually been incredibly easy as a work relationship. Knowing, obviously I grew up with him, so I know how he works, I know who he is, and we've managed to create something which I think represents both of us quite well.
Yeah. It's been a wonderful experience for me to also work with Matt, and I mean, it's great to have your son become basically your working partner. It's been a great adventure together. I think it's sort of brought us much closer together in a different way.
We are grateful for the way all of this came together. I see a question also from Mark Lottig, and he's saying, "Thank you for your talk. That is perfect nourishment for those willing to be amazed." And his question, coastal ecosystems have a role that goes beyond the shore?
That's quite an interesting question, and I mean, that obviously is connected. There's both a connection with the land and a connection with the ocean further offshore. So I mean, there are many land species, like birds, for example, that come down to feed in the intertidal, or otters, let's say, which are also freshwater, mainly inland species. That's the same species that you get on the shore. And salt and nutrients actually blow from the intertidal, into the land. So you have coastal fynbos, which is actually that fynbos which is influenced by coastal phenomena, particularly mist and salt coming in from the land. In the offshore direction, I mean, the same sort of thing happens. So you'll get, for example, the kelps that get eroded away and broken up, and then those nutrients drift offshore and provide sustenance and food for more offshore species. Or you'll get offshore species that will come into the shallows or even into estuaries in order to breed, because the young can find protection. So in rock pools, for example, you find the juveniles, the fry of many different more offshore species of fish, because they gain more protection. They place more places to hide in the kelp bed or in the intertidal than in the open ocean, where there's really nowhere to hide from predators. So there are connections, but the intertidal is more of the littoral zone, like the kelp beds, and the intertidal is definitely a separate system. And for example, a lot of anglers say to me, well, our fish are all gone because the trawlers have taken them. And that's an untrue statement, because the trawlers are actually catching a completely different suite of species. And the species that the anglers catch from the seashore are by and large coastal species which don't occur further offshore. So, oceanic fisheries like trawlers are catching a different group of species of fish to coastal anglers.
Lee, where are your favorite spots to explore? And Cape Town and beyond, maybe rest of Africa.
No, look, I think each spot has its special features, and I mean, because I live in Cape Town, because we're both living in Cape Town, then the spots that we go to most often are spots just in the immediate vicinity here. So as you will have heard me allude in the talk, actually it's quite remarkable how many amazing things we've found right on the prom here in Sea Point, in the middle of the city, and a piece of seashore that you would appear to be very transformed by human activities. Actually, there's stacks of interesting stuff here. But other favorite spots I go to are on the False Bay coast between like Muizenberg and Simonstown. Miller's Point, another really wonderful spot that we go to. Or on the west coast, our favorite spot is Komiki, as we've mentioned, mainly because I've got access to a place to stay there. But Komiki is a very interesting shore with an unusual shore, because it's mostly made out of boulders, and not solid rock, and there's definitely a different suite of animals that live there. But it doesn't matter where you are. When I go on holiday to different parts of the coastline, and I've explored almost every, I don't think there's probably 100-kilometer stretch of the South African coast that I haven't been to, I always find really interesting stuff. So each place is different, and it has different things to offer. Obviously, you find more tropical and diverse species on the East Coast, and there are much fewer species on the West Coast. The Cape Peninsula is like a melting pot between West Coast and South Coast, so it has elements of both, which makes it particularly interesting. But the Eastern Cape Coast, for example, is very little explored, because most of the research has been done either in the Western Cape or in KwaZulu-Natal. So it's all good. So it's all good places. The best place is the place right in front of your house, or that you can get to. Obviously, rocky shores have a lot more interesting stuff on them than beaches.
I'm going to bring the session to a close. Thank you so much again.